This is a short, quick follow-up on naming names. So something I just was reading, I was watching a video today, and then I decided to double check it and get other sources, and I came across a discussion on this topic again about sacred names and people using Yeshua, Yahshua, whatever all the variants are. But here's a discussion of people at least seem somewhat knowledgeable, and there's a little disagreements there, so I'm going to go over this real quick. Somebody is asking how to write Jesus in his language. And so this person is going, they don't know what his language was. They wanted to know what the name looked like, what it sounded like. And they're posting some Hebrew and Aramaic and other languages here, which I don't read, so I'm not going to try to say what those are. But let's look at this discussion. This person, a translator, says that Jesus spoke Galilean Aramaic, a Western dialect, which everybody seems to agree with, written in square Hebrew script, which, if you know from earlier videos I've done, wasn't necessarily Hebrew. They borrowed it, also the square script. The Paleo-Hebrew was much different. Anyway, specific handwriting that he would have used would be classified as Herodian, which had distinct letter shapes or forms. This little squiggle here is the Syriac alphabet. Was a novelty in Jesus' day, so would not have been used, and so he dismisses that one. And then this person shows a poster that says that's what this means. This is the Tetragrammaton, as we'll go into that, or this next guy will go into. And they're saying, they saw this poster and they said, well, this is how it is, and this person is saying that's the Tetragrammaton, usually transliterated as Yahweh or YHWH. It is not Yeshua. So he's putting that to rest, that that letter acronym is not Yeshua, okay? And then this next person says they did research on Old Saxon all the way up to modern English so they could show everyone that the Bible, at least up to the King James, had not been altered. But guess what else I found? They say there was no J in English, which is true. In the early English, there was no J. Also, that English came from German, which I also knew. Now, the Germans say J like a Y sound, like Ya, Y, or J-A, it's spelled in German, means yes, and it's Ya or Yeah, depending on who you ask. But the point is it's the Y sound, not the J sound in German. So they say you should use the Y sound. And this person says the letter J was originally just an orthographic variant for initial I, or final I in Roman numerals, much like how V was an orthographical variant for initial U. I'm going to stop right there because what they mean by that is a beginning letter of a word or sentence. Instead of having a capital, or sometimes along with that, they would have the initial letter take a different form. So an I had the little hook added to it to make a J. Okay, so it was still starting with an I in early times, but they gave it that extra squiggle to show that it was a beginning letter. So that's where the J came from. Nobody was being nefarious and trying to create a new letter or change the name of Jesus, and they were simply writing it per the convention of the time and the language, which was if you started a letter with an I, it made the J shape as we know it. And the same thing for the letter V, according to this person, was how you started a word that started with a U, you would use the V shape instead. That's what they mean by an orthographical variant for an initial letter. Hey, Michael. And it says it wasn't until later that J sound evolved into this is supposedly, the system of international pronunciation that people use when, like, for example, singers, opera singers especially, will learn this notation to know how to pronounce something. I don't know that notation, but I'll take his word for it, that this means J. This D and a lowercase 3, or, below the baseline 3, that means the J sound, and depends on the language. In most Germanic languages, which of course English is a part of, how it is kept it how we would pronounce a Y sound. It's also pronounced like Y in all these other languages. Some of it's also an H sound, like in Spanish. So it started out as the Aramaic Yeshua, okay? If that's a sound, I assume with the line over the S. Greeks could not pronounce that, so Greek grammar required, remember my naming names video about being unable to pronounce something, could not pronounce that, so they required a different ending. So it perturbed to Jesus, okay? There's their initial I, which made the ye sound like, we typically get the mispronounced name, like iota is how you write out the name for that letter in the Greek alphabet, but it's pronounced iota. Iota. So I-O, the I, starting I, gave the y sound, and so it was pronounced like Jesus or Jesus. And then he goes on to say Latin-speaking Romans borrowed the Greek version, which didn't require the OU diphthong. A diphthong is two vowels making one sound. So it became these capital letters I-E-S, V-S. And you know what we just said about V, that sometimes, especially if it was when you were etching something in stone, hard to make curves. So you went with the other shape for that same letter. That's a U, even though it looks like a V to us. And then he goes on, the English version was based off the Latin form with the initial I rules became Jesus. Okay? And then just the pronunciation changed into the J sound. So that's how we got this pronunciation. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing nefarious about it. And there is still a lot of disagreement over how it would have been pronounced in the first century anyway. So there's more discussion, and that's why the J has a dot like in the lower I cases, and I think they're being a little bit facetious there, or sarcastic. This person is saying that these Hebrew letters mean salvation. He's giving the meaning, the translation, rather than just the pronunciation. And also in Matthew 1:21, call his name Jesus, for he saved his people from their sins. In other words, they're saying that's the name meaning. Okay? So, as with Jerusalem, pronounced Yerushalayim, from what he wrote here, the Y turned into the J and the SH into an S. This is just how languages work and how they morph from one tongue to another and from one time to another. They keep changing. And so this person is saying, hey, I looked up stuff on Google. And this person is saying it depends, and there's complications. You could pronounce that as Yeshua. But then it gets a little more complex. This person, let me read this one first. The anointed one is Hamashiach, or wherever the emphasis is, the anointed one, equivalent to Messiah, which in Greek was Christos, or Christ, which is where we get that word. Not part of his name was a title, we all know that. And it means that he was called salvation, which fulfilled prophecy. So this person says, referring to the original quote, modern Syriac script, what we think of as Hebrew letters came from Aramaic letters. Hebrew adopted the Aramaic writing system. So this would be the American, what they have here would be the Aramaic way the Lord's name was written 2,000 years ago, but its pronunciation is a matter of debate. Modern Syriac is named and pronounced as Isho, but it's not entirely clear how the name would have been pronounced by the Holy Family. We know that they spoke the Galilean dialect of Jewish Palestinian Aramaic, which to call it Palestine at that time is inaccurate in my opinion. A possible reconstruction might be Yeshu, but not Yeshua, which is how it's pronounced in Hebrew. And the reason we'll get into, inscriptions from antiquity have this name, no nikud, or the dots and dashes, the vowel pointings, which were invented in the Middle Ages for the easier reading of Hebrew, encouraged the reading by Hebrew Jews in the diaspora. So we have to keep that in mind too. The vowel pronunciations were a very much later addition to Hebrew writing. This person says Hoshea, or Hosea as we pronounce it in English, we're also pronouncing everything else wrong, hey Joe Allen, means the Lord is salvation. And in fact, the Aramaic form of this name was a very common one 2,000 years ago. The New Testament itself mentions other people named Jesus, specifically, Jesus Justus in Colossians 4:11, Jesus Barabbas, so it would be an irony on who they asked for in place of Jesus of Nazareth. So, of course, Bar-Abba means son of the Father. Let's see, he's saying you could use Google Translate, but, don't rely on that. And he says, it's a basic word in Hebrew, and you should never call him Yeshu, or Yeshu, as he is called by the Jews in Hebrew, since his rejection, because it's in the initials, can't read that, I don't read Hebrew, which means erased to be his memory. They erased, that's a typo there, to make it like that intentionally to say we want him erased from history. So pronouncing it, trying to pronounce it the way they think is accurate, and nobody knows for sure, could have them wind up pronouncing a name that means may his name be erased, as the rabbis wanted, because they rejected Jesus as Messiah. So that's the complication I mentioned. This person says, Yahoshua, the Yod-Ha combination points to the name being theonymic, the truncated form of the Tetragrammaton. We find this used frequently. Isaiah is Yeshua Yahu, meaning YHWH, or Yod-He, something like that, is salvation. And then they go over some other examples between, the different masculine and feminine nouns and so forth. The fact remains that we are talking about the Aramaic, not Hebrew. Jesus and his family didn't speak Hebrew. That's pretty well established, as far as I know. That wasn't the language of the family home in Nazareth. The language of the family home in Nazareth was Aramaic, as that had been regular everyday language of the Jewish people living in the region I don't call Palestine since the Babylonian exile, where Aramaic was the lingua franca of the Babylonian Empire, and later the Persian Empire. That's why a number of post-exile books, which make up the Old Testament, are written entirely or in part in Aramaic, such as Esther and Daniel. The language Jesus spoke was Aramaic, and when Mary and Joseph addressed him, they would have spoken his name the way normal for them as Galilean Jews, and that would have been probably something similar to Yeshu or Yeshu, without the on the end. This person back again, hey Vic, and Mark, I think I said hi to everybody. Salvation is necessarily by Yahweh, or however, this is an acronym, God in this context. So pronunciation, so far as it matters today, it depends on whether they're trying to mock him or not, I guess, basically from what I'm reading here. And they don't know that they're mocking him. That's just a weird sound to them, because that too gets lost in antiquity. So many see it as meaning erased from his memory, so better not to use this version. Apparently the name became common around the time he lived, but it was not common before, and is not common today. And so when people, the point I'm trying to make, and that was the end of that page, the point I'm trying to make is when people try to reconstruct the ancient Hebrew names and say, this is how you must say or spell Jesus' name, they are probably in many cases inadvertently saying, may his name be erased. So here again is another reason not to try to be more Hebrew than thou and say the name like somebody thinks it was said in the first century and what it means, because one little slip and you change the meaning. This is a common thing with Hebrew, that by vowel pointing you can totally turn the meanings of words, and why saying Jesus is not wrong. You could say Yesu in Spanish or whatever, or in other languages that pronounce it as the Y sound, but there's nothing wrong with making it the J sound. It's the same name as it morphs through languages, like I said in the Naming Names video. I just wanted to do this to further support that video because of this second witness, so to speak, of other people who seem fairly knowledgeable on languages and the history of language and etymology, arguing over little fine points and saying, be careful how you spell / pronounce that name, because you could inadvertently be making a curse on Jesus and saying, may his name be forgotten. So there's nothing wrong with the Jesus form as we know it. The J was just, as these people said earlier, just how you began a letter, how you wrote the letter I when you began the word. You know, if it's the first letter, you write it like a J instead of an I. And that's all that was behind that, you know, that change from I to J. So when people make that ridiculous argument, there was no J's in English, I can tell right away that they have not done any study on the matter, and they don't know what they're talking about, because people who have studied the matter don't have a problem with the letter J or how it's pronounced. But they do say to exercise caution in trying to reconstruct a Hebrew or Aramaic pronunciation in the first century, because you could be inadvertently saying, may his name be erased. So again, I don't have a problem as long as, you know, the intent matters, but I'm just saying the argument against Jesus is very, very weak, and the argument in favor of Yeshua, Yahushua, and all the variants is very weak, even weaker, and could be a curse instead of a blessing. So people need to be careful. I have these links in the description. And that's all I wanted to say. You're going to run into this sort of meme pasting all the time. And this is what people have decided. And it's ironic that the KJVOs also use this sort of argument, because this is obviously not English. And by then, English had changed quite a lot. So the point is that people were speaking Aramaic, Western Galilean dialect Aramaic, and be careful how you try to pronounce the name. You can't go wrong with Yesu or Jesus. You just can't go wrong with that. Sorry about I'm flipping through these posts again, but didn't mean to make everybody seasick. Anyway, that's mainly what I wanted to get across, is that there is not only no problem saying Jesus, there could be a problem saying Yahushua or whatever, because you could be saying that Jesus' name should be wiped out. Other than that, I can't think of any other point I wanted to make other than just keep doing your own research. I keep looking for things, or I find things that I wasn't looking for when I'm trying to look up something else. That's how that works. But, you know, you can't just necessarily ask the Jews either. They're the ones who wanted to wipe out his name. And Greek is absolutely, as the one video I was watching showed, Greek was the lingua franca of when it came to writing and going across cultures. Aramaic is what they were speaking in the area now of Israel. But all around the Mediterranean, all three sides of it, they were speaking Greek because of the conquest of Alexander the Great a few hundred years before. And whenever Paul and Silas and those people went on the missionary journeys, they didn't have to bring the Hebrew scriptures or Aramaic scriptures with them. Everybody had them in the synagogues as the Septuagint. So and other people make kind of I think a little bit of a dodgy argument, but something to consider, the fact that when Jesus in Greek, in the, you know, as it's written in Greek in the New Testament, said that he would make God's name known, they would take that, this person that I was listening to took it quite literally and said, hey, the name he's referring to when he said that was Theos, or, you know, the Greek word for God in general, and they were quoting the Septuagint, which also said Theos. So there was no Hebrew Aramaic names involved at all in the name that Jesus made known in his day. Take that for what you will, but again, the point is there's nothing wrong with saying Jesus, and there's possibly something wrong with saying Yahushua or anything like that. When you put the or whatever sound on the end of it, you could be saying, I'm not saying you are or that you mean it, but you could be saying a phrase that means may his name be wiped out. All right, let me look at the chat real quick. Zen Garcia, I have heard some of his talks before. He will start out just fine saying that all these ancient documents in Egyptian and all these things support the Bible. But then when he gets to the Bible, he completely Gnosticizes the meaning and talks about Adam having a first wife. Now the name just left me. I had it right there on the tip of my tongue. Lilith, I think, was the one. And that there, you know, he believes in kind of a pre-Adamic race, and Lilith is a Gnostic teaching name on all the pre-Adamic race, and Sophia and all these things were very Gnostic. And he believes in the serpent seed theory, which is completely Gnostic. It is false. Genesis 4:1 says that Adam fathered Cain. And so there's just 100 reasons I've gone over before about serpent seed theory that is just false. And that's something that Zen Garcia teaches. So, again, I don't like to debate people. I would prefer that you just, you know, because I've seen his stuff. I'd prefer him to watch some of my stuff and then just, you know, think whatever he wants to think about it. But you have to be very careful with him, because although he'll argue in favor of the authenticity of the scriptures, he will twist what they mean according to the Gnostic teaching from what I've heard. Okay, that's about all I know. Let's see what else in the chat. Buffalo chicken and pizza. I'm going to have a salad for supper because it's a weekday. I only splurge on the weekends. So anyway, that's all I'll say about Zen Garcia. Yeah, lots of images, and, you know, people have done the guilt by association thing on me, and if we did that with him, I don't know about some of those people. Hey, Katie, and Michael, and anybody else. I think I shouted you out. I think I got everybody else. But, yeah, I only debate people in writing anyway. Nobody has ever taken me up on that, but in writing, you don't get people, you know, bringing a whole bunch of facts that nobody has time to go check. And in the moment of debate, people won't remember about the fact checking that comes later. They only remember the moment of debate, and that's why I don't like spoken debates. I like written ones. And in the end, people are usually already have their mind made up. So again, I've seen some of his stuff. I've listened to some of his videos. All I could recommend you do is have him to visit my website or channel and check that out and just see what I say about that stuff. So, yeah, there's a lot of people, some of their stuff is good. Some of it's horrible. You know, there's people who are, you know, King James onlyists that I've seen and spoken of before, who are absolutely right about prophecy and the rapture and totally wrong and abusive against any version but the King James, that makes them practically idolaters and book burners. So, you know, you be discerning, but know what tool to use to discern with. Let's see, Hebrew roots. Yeah, that's very, very bad. It's what the Apostle Paul fought against most of his life as a Christian. He was always hounded by people trying to put Christians under the laws of Moses. And I think the Covenant series, which I, again, have made a playlist of, should put that to rest. Thracian script. Okay. Yeah. Pick and choose when it comes to, if you have a standard for determining true from false. You know, I'm not telling anybody not to listen to Zen or anybody else. I'm just saying be discerning, because you'll get a mixture of things, especially the Gnostic, Lilith, pre-Adamic race, serpent seed teachings. Those are the bad ones that I've heard coming from him. But anyway, that's all I really wanted to do, is follow up to naming names and show from this article that's linked in the description why it is that there's no danger at all saying Jesus. There could be a danger saying Yeshua, Yahushua, whatever. Okay. Yeah, Messianic Church. This is going backwards. For Jews who have not become Christians, I mean, they're still in unbelief. They're still in a no man's land, kind of, because they have been dispersed by God for rejecting Messiah. And if you remember that chart I did on the covenants, right now everybody has, Jew and Gentile alike, has to accept Jesus, and that is without a covenant. That is a completely different thing, a promise. And it's only after we're gone will the Messianic Davidic priesthood of Zadok line reconvene after the tribulation, after Israel is purified. But there's no, this is not the time for that. So yeah, be discerning and know where your standards are. All right, that's all I had about naming names and the sacred name. I really don't see any point in doing more about that, but I thought that this helped to be another source to back up the other video that I've done that I also have linked to in the description there. All right, thanks for coming, and we'll see you all later.